We might be in the golden age of comedy. Oh, this isn't about comedy, this is about horror. I also believe we're in the golden age of comedy. Get out! Hey everyone, I'm senior video producer Jeff McCobb, and we are back with another CinemaBlend roundtable debate, because there is a topic that has often been discussed around the CinemaBlend offices, which is that we are in the golden age of horror. There's some really experimental stuff coming out right now. A24 is absolutely killing it. But there's a lot of long-standing horror franchises that leave us wondering, like, why? So I've gathered some of our biggest horror fans, Braden Roberts, Corey Chichizola, and Cody Beck. What we want to get into, the point of this debate is, what are the most overrated horror franchises of all time? Now this is a hot take. I don't expect that we'll agree. So I'm gonna start with Braden, specifically because I've probably BS'd about horror with this guy the most. He has a Black Phillip tattoo on his forearm, so it's deeply, deeply embedded into your persona. So, bro, what is, in your opinion, the most overrated horror franchise of all time?
So I think, horror franchises in general are incredibly hard to do as is, because a lot of these the spookiest movies are self-encapsulating. You get one story and you're like, wow, that was a very spooky story and I'm very scared. But that's hard to parse out and make an overarching story or theme. But I have one big bone to pick with one franchise in particular, and that is the Conjuring franchise.
We have to get out of here.
I'm afraid that's not going to help.
And all of their little Annabelle spin-offs, and The Nun, and Annabelle Comes Home. And I just... Somebody once described it as the MCU of horror movies to me. And I think that phrase was scarier than any movie that I've actually seen from the people behind The Conjuring. It's a successful franchise. It's made $1 billion or more off a super small budget on all of its films, which I think is great. And if it's an entry point to horror for some people, I think that's great too. But in terms of innovation or exciting things that we're seeing in horror today, like we're seeing with The Witch or we're seeing with Mandy, you're not going to get that from any of these films. And frankly, I just think they're a little cookie cutter, maybe a little boring for me. So they go by the way of the MCU films in that regard too, in my opinion. That's another hot take I have.
That's a scorching hot take.
Yeah, but that's my bone to pick with the Conjuring universe for sure.
I condemn you back to hell!
Yeah, they call it the Conjuring universe. They don't even call it the Conjuring franchise. That is kind of the business model that they're mimicking, right? So they're like, let's make all these interconnected films. Did you like any of them?
No,
yeah,
I didn't like a single...
You were not scared at all? Like Insidious 1, The Conjuring 1, like these were movies that like shooketh me to a core when they came out.
I will agree that the first Conjuring is a good movie. But once you start expanding past there and you're like, oh, let's go play with the Warrens' closet of toys, haunted toys, I just don't care. The Nun was absolutely 100% forgettable. Annabelle Comes Home was also forgettable. It's just, I don't really care. They're just pulling things. They're literally pulling things off the Warren shelves, and they're like, "Oh, hey, this is kind of a little spooky item we have. What if we made a 90-minute movie about it?"
What else did you touch? Everything.
And while that works for some people who are looking for just an easy Halloween October movie, to push the envelope for horror, it doesn't really work for me. It seems kind of lazy and boring, honestly.
Braden is belittling Conjuring fans. Like, I know you want this easy October film for the kids, okay? But I go a little darker. Cody, you don't seem to agree.
No, I have so many differing opinions on this. So a couple things, like Braden. So Braden, didn't we see The Nun and I guess The Curse of La Llorona like together at screenings, I think?
And we saw Annabelle Comes Home together. We saw all three of the most recent Conjuring movies together.
That's why he doesn't like the Conjuring universe. He's just
Cody's
sick of seeing
company.
movies with Cody.
He doesn't like me. No, and I think I remember, like, because we were at the AMC Esquire in Clayton for like a couple of those. And so, okay, I will agree, like, sure, they shouldn't have set up like a cinematic universe around this. Like, and to also say anything is like an MCU is like, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? Like, No one can hit that bar. But like, horror has never done that before. And I think the first Conjuring movie is terrifying. Like, I loved it to death. The second one, was a little bit more annoying, but also like I'm a huge like true crime fan and stuff, and like the Warrens are like terrible people. Like they in real life, they are not good people. Like at me on Twitter, like they are not good people. And so I hate the way that like they're portrayed because they were con artists and they were terrible. And so like I hate that we're like building this universe around them. But I kind of like love the idea that they literally had a room full of horrors that we could like pick from. Like I know you talked about like, oh, we're literally picking stuff off the shelves and like making movies about that. And I get where that's kind of cheesy, but like that was an easy direction to go, and I was so excited. I hated the ways that they like went about that and the things that they chose, but I actually liked Annabelle Comes Home. I thought that was kind of fun. It was like a weird like Babysitter's Club sort of like, but like horror movie, you know? Like I really kind of like I enjoyed that.
I thought that was really redeeming, that movie, because the first one, I was like, oh no, what happened?
I don't know, like of all the horror franchises I hate, The Conjuring is just not one of the ones up there.
You know, I think there's fine points to be made for like how influential it is and getting a cinematic universe started for horror, which I think is cool. I don't necessarily think that it's great though, and I don't really think that I have not seen effective horror that exists in that ecosystem. The Conjuring universe is the number one staple, but if you look at it from a studio perspective, I mean, they spent what, $130 million to make all those movies, and they've made over $1 billion, maybe $1.5 billion over the course of the entire franchise. From a financial perspective, I completely get it. I mean, you'd be silly to not do it. But from a critical perspective, I don't know if I'm sold as much.
They also didn't deserve all that money. Like it shouldn't have made that much money.
Yeah.
Like I'll be the first to say that.
All right, so that's a hot take. Conjuring franchise, super popular. Corey, what's the most overrated horror franchise of all time?
So this one I try to think really hard about, like the classics, the villains that you think of that carry these franchises. And for me, I never really could get into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies.
Oh, it's hard, mate.
They're just, as far as the big villains go, I could do... Leatherface is probably the one that I could do without, just because he just doesn't give me anything but like chainsaws are scary. Chainsaws are objectively scary, but like as far as all the
every haunted house,
all the other villains like give me something else. Either like they're stoic and silent, like Michael Myers, or they have like a banter to them or whatever. And so just as far as the villains, like I just feel like Creepy Guy with the Chainsaw has been done a lot, and it's a franchise that's had a lot of installments already. And while we're in this moment that it feels like all these properties can come back, Child's Play came back, the Halloween movie's really good, and I just don't want them to return to this. Like, I want to see every other villain before I want to see a return to Leatherface.
I don't have strong feelings about Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a franchise, but I will say that first film maybe sticks with me more than any other horror movie I've ever seen. I saw that when I was a kid, and I can't get that image of that woman screaming, running through the forest out of my head. Like, it was incredibly disturbing.
Yeah, I agree, but I just don't know where they could go to keep me interested at this point. Like, I was even, like, the Jessica Alba one was fine. Or Jessica Biel, excuse me, wrong Jessica. Like, that one, they did a good job, but it just... Another thing with my horror consumption is, like, I'm the guy who giggles when someone gets decapitated, generally. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies just feel, like, a little meaner. Like, I can't just, like, pop some popcorn and enjoy this horror movie on an October night. Like, it's just not a fun time.
Corey, I'm so surprised at your take on this because I like the campy kind of stuff, like the original Evil Dead, you know, like I can kind of laugh through and things like that. But, like, I would think that something that you couldn't laugh through, you would be, like, more attracted to. So it's, like, really interesting to me that you're like, I don't like this because it's too weird. Like, I thought we were brothers in brutality, and so now I'm confused. Like, is it too much for you?
No, I just, like, don't need more of it. Like, I don't think it's a franchise that needs as many entries as it's had.
Okay.
The topic is horror franchise.
Good, but it's like exactly, and as far as like I said with the villains, like I just don't love him. Like, even if you know, like, it's weird. Like, horror fans weirdly like we love like these horrible characters. And I just don't feel that same affinity for him as I do Ghostface, Freddy Krueger, name everyone else.
So you're talking about too many like, extensions and like sequels and all that sort of stuff, but like that's what brings me to mind, which is Halloween, which is like I don't like Halloween. I think
that's your pick for the most overrated horror franchise
That's
of all
my
time, is
pick.
Halloween?
Michael Myers is boring. He's the quintessential like I'm walking and I still catch up to these people that are running away sort of thing. Like, and I feel like and think about like Halloween H2O. Like, spoiler alert, he gets his head cut off in the end by like Jamie Lee Curtis and stuff. And then they're just like, hey, let's reboot this franchise and like F everything else that came before this. And so like I don't even know what's canonical anymore. And so I just feel like from a franchise that's been just like repeated and rebooted so many times, I feel like Halloween is the epitome of just the worst. I'm just not excited for any more Halloween stuff because I feel like it's just been overdone. And is he supernatural? Is he not? Like, it's so boring.
First, I have to say that like the 1968 original movie completely changed slashers forever. And we cannot deny that. See, like, the thing for me I just find Michael Myers terrifying. And I think he is otherworldly, obviously. Like, we see him with great feats of strength throughout these movies. But I get what you're saying with the timeline, but I kind of feel like since they've been jumping timelines and they've started over like 5 times already, that like when they started over again, I was like, yes, of course.
But like, I feel like the timeline jumps make it where I'm not scared of him anymore because I'm just like, it's just some other asshole. Like, why is he terrifying, I guess I would ask.
See, I felt that the new ones actually really improved upon the Michael problem because him being related to Laurie like was weird and not supposed to be part of it. He was like, that was not part of the story, and then it became like a money grab thing. I loved that David Gordon Green, especially. I really loved that latest Halloween movie so much. Maybe it's because I was there on the set for work. And Jamie Lee Curtis was an actual dream, but Halloween was my favorite prior to that set visit. But I especially love in this movie because they didn't make them relatives. Instead, he's just like a random force of chaos in the world. Especially, we see him in like that long shot in the new movie, and even in H2O. I rewatched H2O over the weekend, actually. And I like when he's just a random menace of chaos. I like when he's sparing people, deciding when to not kill them, and deciding to kill them at random. I think is really terrifying because you can't figure out what his motivations are.
Here's an important thing to note about all of your picks is that every one of you agrees that The Conjuring, the original Halloween, and the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre are all good movies and are all like staples of horror. But your beef with those franchises is how they progressed, and that it just like went on like too damn long. And I can dig on that. But then again, most of them change hands a lot too. So it's kind of like, where are you going to fault it? Like, I don't think that Michael in Space is necessarily representative of the Halloween franchise as a whole, you know what I mean? So, I don't know. There's something to be said for the fact that you all respect where the franchise came from, but you're still like, as a franchise, which is the topic of the conversation, it's not good.
I think that speaks to like just spooky stories in general. Like if you're around a campfire and you're telling a spooky story, you don't hop in on part 5 and say like, okay, last night guys, remember how we told the first 3 parts of this story and that first one was really good. Now we're on the 5th one and our killer goes to space.
And it's in space.
And it's, yeah, exactly. And so horror is such a finite thing to me. Like you can't be scared for a very long period of time. You're kind of like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And then you kind of come back and you realize. And then to stretch the same horror or villain or franchise over multiple films, it's much more difficult to retain those same scared feelings with each iteration.
Yeah.
You get used to it, which I think is what's happening with both Leatherface and Halloween in this situation. And I'll backtrack a little bit and give The Conjuring credit in that regard, that at least they're trying new scares and they're pulling new things off the shelf, not always old things.
Do you echo that sentiment, Cody and Corey? Is it the longevity you think that is really your beef with the franchises that you picked?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think part of it is that I don't care to see more of this exact franchise, and that's just how I'm feeling, and that's my relationship to horror, which is specific. Everyone has their own like way they enjoy it, and that's just not a franchise that I find to be a good time for me to watch over and over and over again.
Maybe actually, Jeff, now that you mention it, maybe it's not that I loved all the originals, because I don't think I love the original Friday the 13th, but like I think it's just more about the idea of them, you know? And like even I watched you know, the first Freddy Krueger movie the other night in Nightmare on Elm Street, and like I feel like he's even barely in that, you know? Like, and so I think it's more like the idea that these horror franchises have built up in my head and these icons that I have, there's probably no way that like any new movies could like satisfy them because of like the nostalgia and things like that. So I feel like they're fighting a losing battle. So A24, if you want to step up, make some new horror characters, I'd be fine with that because you're just never going to satisfy me.
I will say, quick plug, given the subject matter and given that Cody's got some hot takes, he also produces a dope podcast called the American Hauntings Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Make sure to check that out, download that on iTunes.
Fine.
What do you guys think? What's the most overrated horror franchise of all time? Let us know in the comments. Is it The Conjuring? Is it Halloween? Is it the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Or is it something we haven't even tackled yet? Keep the conversation going. Braden, Corey, Cody, thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.